So since we are here, we might as well say hello to everyone before Alfred does the formal introduction, right? We are live, broadcasting from Manila, Philippines, with our guest today, who is coming in from Frankfurt. Am I correct, Friedemann? You're in Frankfurt.
I'm in Frankfurt at the moment, yes.
So good morning to you.
Good morning.
And good afternoon to those who are just joining us. This is the Ateneo de Manila Department of Sociology and Anthropology webinar series of Paleoanthropology grades. And this afternoon, we have with us Dr. Friedemann Schrenk. We will be talking more about him and his wonderful talk in a few minutes. But in the meantime, come in, welcome, get yourselves comfortable. It's going to be a very interesting afternoon. So good afternoon to my colleagues here with us today. Of course, our main man, Dr. Alfred Pawlik, Ado, and Dr. Riczar Fuentes.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mylene.
And we're seeing right now Dr. Mary Rosales is joining us. Good afternoon, Ma'am Mary.
Good afternoon.
How are you? It's a few minutes before we formally start, but we are saying hello to everyone that's coming in right now. For those who are unaware, we have started live streaming. So hello and good afternoon or good morning. Is there such thing as good evening already? Wherever you are, hi.
Okay, so Dr. Pawlik, in a minute, we can begin.
Sure. Thank you, Ado.
So we are on Zoom right now, and we are also live streaming on Facebook Live and YouTube. Am I correct, Ido? We are 29 on Zoom, but we have more viewers who are also watching us on Facebook and YouTube because for some people, it is not possible to get on Zoom because of the internet connectivity here in the islands, Friedemann. This problem happened to me 2 weeks ago when we had David Lorquipanitsa. My internet just kept cutting out. So this is one of our realities here in an archipelago in the tropics. But yeah, we will be joined by more people as we go along. So
Yes.
I guess it's time, yeah?
Yes, we may begin the webinar.
Yes, we can begin now. People are still joining us, but let's start with the introduction of our speaker. And okay, then. All right, then I'll begin. So hello, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our archaeology webinar series here at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and Traces Asia, and to another exciting lecture entitled The Invention of Human Races. The webinar is jointly hosted by Aido Balboa, Mylene Lising, Dr. Riczar Fuentes, and myself. This webinar series is supported by the School of Social Sciences, the Anthropological and Sociological initiatives of the Ateneo, and the Areté and its Eduardo Aboitiz Sandbox zone. Thank you all for joining us today. And today, And you know that we have again an outstanding scientist and internationally known leader in the field of paleoanthropology, Professor Friedemann Schrenk. Dr. Schrenk is director of one of the most dynamic and influential research initiatives on the deep human history, called The Role of Culture in Early Expansions of Humans, or ROCKY. He's also the head of the Paleoanthropology Department of the Senckenberg Natural History Museum and Research Institute, and he is a full professor of paleobiology at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt and the director of its Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Africa. Dr. Schrenk is also overseeing the extensive collections on paleoanthropology and paleontology at his department. For instance, the collection of Gustav Heinrich Ralph von Königswald, whose work has been of great relevance for the archaeology and anthropology of Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines, and of course in Sangiran, Java, if you remember our opening lecture this semester by Dr. Hari Vidyanto. Dr. Schrenk is conducting numerous excavations and field projects, researching on the paleoanthropology, biogeography, and evolutionary ecology in Malawi, in Kenya, in Tanzania, Sudan, and more. While his field research mainly focuses on the African continent and its human origins, Dr. Schrenk and his institute have been vital for us as we collaborate with him and his colleagues and some of his former students in several transdisciplinary academic and research projects. It is a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Friedemann Schrenk in our webinar today. And I hand over the microphone now to Mylene, who can tell us a bit more about our distinguished speaker. Thank you, Mylene.
Thank you, Alfred. So Dr. Friedemann Schrenk is my PhD advisor at the Goethe University and also at the ROCKY program of the Senckenberg Research Institute, both of which are in Frankfurt. It has been a great privilege and so much fun being under the wing of a scientist who is highly respected among his peers in paleoanthropology, which by no means is an easy achievement. If you were in Dr. Donald Johansson's lecture 2 weeks ago, today we will see why Don called Friedemann Schrenk his favorite person. Friedemann's background in the study of human evolution is so well-rounded. Geology, paleontology, anatomy, anthropology, you name it. He's a genuine scientist in this field, which makes this talk of his on the invention of human races ever so poignant. Here you will see a high-level scientist use scientific facts translated into knowledge and wisdom. And in so doing, Friedemann places the study of human evolution in a larger context that makes it relevant not only to experts and specialists in this field, but to each and every one of us here today. Actually, to everyone. During the pandemic, Dr. Schrenk initiated the 6-episode documentary Windows into Human Diversity, which is available on YouTube in place of the annual von Königswald lectures by prominent scientists at the Senckenberg Research Institute. The episodes are Hominin Expansions into Southeast Asia, Origins and Lifestyle of Homo erectus, the largest hominin that ever lived, Gigantopithecus, hominin and hominid diversity in Southeast Asia, hominin expansions across Southeast Asia, and the GHR von Königswald and his paleoanthropological legacy. As you can see, that series focused on Southeast Asia, our very own backyard. You can find these on YouTube, type Senckenberg Windows on Humanity. With this lecture this afternoon, Dr. Friedemann Schrenk shows us the value of the study of human evolution as he utilizes it to help us develop a better understanding of ourselves as humans. And so I now turn you over to Dr. Riczar Fuentes for an overview of Dr. Friedemann Schrenk's talk. Rick?
Thanks, Mylene. Okay, for the abstract of this talk. So today we know that there are no fixed genetic differences and thus no biologically defined races in humans. We also know that skin colors are due to different UV radiation, yet human races were probably the most influential European invention ever. The so-called discovery of the world by Europeans also led to its description. The first scientific journal appeared in 1665, and soon after, a work on the classification of people in the newly discovered parts of the world was published. Since the middle of the 18th century, biological sciences played a decisive role in the invention of races and racism. Besides claiming to be the birthplace of humanity, Europe was in the center of exploiting foreign continents and their people, justified by Eurocentric racial views. Today, anthropological and paleoanthropological research depicts human bicultural diversity embedded in biological and cultural universals of Homo sapiens worldwide. For this afternoon's talk entitled The Invention of Human Races, we welcome Professor Friedemann Schrenk. Professor, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mylene and Alfred and Rick, for this very extensive introduction. So I'm very happy to be in the Philippines. I mean, of course, I would have been more happy to be there in person, but I will still come when this pandemic is over finally. Now, my talk today, the title of my talk already actually says it all: human races are an invention, right? I mean, this is the most important message here, meaning human races have been constructed. It's a construction, right? And I want to show you how this happens so that all of us can engage and enjoy the deconstructing of races again. So it puzzles me actually that the draft for the future European Constitution, which should be here, but I don't know where it is. Okay, you see it here. That's the draft for the future European Constitution, and it really puzzles me that besides color and ethnic and social origin, it specifically mentions race, right? Where France, for example, deleted the term in its constitution in 2018 already. So the term race or breed does exist actually, but only for domestic animals and bred varieties, right? If biological systematics is not sufficient to describe varieties or subspecies, in zoology, the term breed or race is used. In botany, this is called variety. But now back to humans. An important question for me is, did the invention of human races lead to racism? No, I think it was the other way around. Racism was first. The invention of races was a result of existing racism. So what is racism then? I think differences or distinctions alone do not necessarily lead to racism. Rather, it is the instrumentalization of these differences, right? For power or political purpose, or for the justification of domination, for exploitation, imperialism, colonialism, and slavery. And in the most simple terms, racism is the difference plus power, right? As George Fredrickson put it. And he considers religious intolerance and xenophobia as a sort of proto-racist behavior. Maybe we'll get to that later. Okay, so it is in this sense that racism also existed in paleoanthropology. The assumption was that the cradle of humankind was Europe, right? And of course, the first finds that were recognized as human ancestors in 1856 were the European Neanderthals. But of course, later in the 19th century, the cradle of humankind moved far away from Europe. Right? It moved to Southeast Asia, where Eugene Dubois discovered human fossils on Java. And some European academics became very nervous about that. So the cradle of humankind had to be brought back to Europe, right? Where else could have humans originated? Indeed, completely unexpected, a fragmented fossil skull with a big brain and an ape-like lower jaw was officially discovered, right, in a gravel pit near Piltdown in Southeast England in 1912. actually it was fabricated, but only in the 1950s, with the invention of modern techniques for dating, it was possible to prove that Piltdown Man was a hoax. Now, here's a reconstruction of the Piltdown hoax, but the story continued in a totally unexpected place because a 2 million year old skull was discovered 1924 in South Africa. The town child showed exactly opposite features from those of the Piltdown hoax from England. It had a small brain, but was clearly bipedal. And Raymond Dart, a neuroanatomist, immediately recognized that the orientation of the spinal cord, it was not as it is in a quadruped. Yeah. So that's why we take it away again. But it is actually under the brain as in a biped. Since then, we know that the origin of humans was not the big brain, but upright walking, which started more than 6 million years ago. Now, about 2.8 million years ago, the pre-humans such as Australopithecus gave rise to the genus Homo. And the origin of Homo was triggered by factors of biological as well as cultural evolution. That's why we use the term biocultural evolution and diversity for the genus Homo. Now, what makes humans human? What are the common biological roots of humanity? Maybe just 3 short basic answers. First, its attractiveness is more important than aggression, as evidenced by the loss of large canines and the simultaneous broadening of the face. Second, knowledge sharing, whereas chimps, for example, make different tools in different subpopulations, humans share knowledge among the entire population. And third, it's a behavioral trait that we can call sharing and caring, like caring for the young and for the old in the society. There's a great example, as you know, from Dimanisi. These factors are among the most important ones for the successful cooperation in a human group. And there is an expression for that by Joshua Green, who called humans forming moral tribes, meaning that cooperation within groups resulted in confrontation between groups. And whoever is in power defines what is history. Because history does not happen, right? It just does not happen by itself. It is being made up by us. For example, for Europeans, humans and humanity originated in Europe, right? And one of the important early fossils is this jaw discovered in 1907 in Mauer near Heidelberg in Germany. Of course, it was called Adam, right? So Adam came from Germany, of course, right? And I'm convinced that this fossil made the British angry and was one of the underlying causes for the Piltdown hoax as well. But there were more hoaxes in France and others in Germany later on. But of course, many finds over the last 100 years came to light, and each of, or most of these finds claim to have something to do with the origin of the genus Homo. And you see some of them here, just to give you an overview. Now we are already in Olduvai in 1960, Sangiran, another find. I mean, the early finds from Sangiran and from the 1936s, you see down there. But then famous fossils from East Turkana, from Kobifora, then Ethiopia, West Turkana. So you see over the last 100 years, I mean, 100 years after Heidelberg, there came a lot of fossils to light. And now we have many more, much more evidence than 100 years ago to reconstruct the story, because now we have to sort these fossils a bit, right? I mean, we can sort them according to year of find, but that's not very useful. So we should, we have 2 ways of sorting them. I think the first one is the geological age. So let's do that and sort these fossils according to their age. You see, now suddenly our Heidelberg jaw, right, which was called Adam, it's not very young. It's not very old anymore. It's somewhere in the middle. There's fossils which are much older now. So Adam from Germany has nothing to do with the origin of humanity. I mean, we see that immediately, right? but the second sorting we can now do, and that is also very important, is according to geographic location, right? And so let's sort them. The age stays the same, but we sort these fossils according to geography. And so now what do we see? Okay, the time scale is the same, but what we see is we don't need Europe, right? And we don't need Asia for defining the origin of humans. Africa is the cradle of humankind, and that is what we see in the fossil record, right? And later on, also Homo sapiens, of course, evolved in Africa and expanded all over the globe. Apart from fossil evidence, there's linguistic and archaeological data, genetic data, etc., to support our interpretations. And that's what we see. You know, then later on, expansion into, very early expansion into Australia, then into Europe, and then the latest expansions into America, first into South America, and then into North America. So I think you know most of these details, but I think what is important here is that early expansions of Homo sapiens always involved mixing, hybridization with early humans that were already there, that's such as Neanderthals, Denisovans, maybe also Homo erectus in Asia. And always constant and, I mean, vibrant biocultural exchanges worldwide, right? And so about 100,000 generations after the origin of genus Homo, expansions and mixing of population growth led to the emergence of centers of power. Right? One of the oldest examples of this is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, possibly a temple structure. At the beginning, I mentioned religious intolerance and xenophobia. If you ask me, Göbekli Tepe might also be the origin of religious intolerance, but that took on proto-racist features in the Middle Ages. Maybe around 200 generations later, we also see evidence of violence related of xenophobia. For example, in this site in Germany, called Thalheim, the massacre of Thalheim, that's north of Stuttgart. In that massacre, 34 people were murdered by invaders 7,000 years ago. Possibly it was land theft and access to resources. It is very possible that xenophobia of the inhabitants towards the attacking group was behind it. We know, for example, that during expansions, original inhabitants and newcomers only began to mix after several generations. Now, let's go back, or let's go further into the age of antiquity. Here, people were not divided according to skin color, but according to wealth, education, legal status, and so on. Now, if you see this mosaic, it's in Rome. If you see this mosaic like this with small stones from all over the corners of the Roman Empire, you involuntarily think of slavery, right? Just because of the immense amount of work behind these mosaics, from the work in the quarries to the sewing of the individual elements. And of course, the Romans had slaves, but the Greeks also had a slave-oriented proto-racism. And Aristotle legitimized slavery and imperialism simply because non-Greeks, as barbarians, did not have reason, right? But slavery has nothing to do with skin color, but with aggression and oppression of other groups. People were enslaved in Africa too, long before Europeans started to take over. I mean, enslaved by Africans, long before Europeans started to take over and exploit this African slave trade. So these three colored bangles symbolize three healing spirits that connected enslaved African people to their homeland. Now, in the Middle Ages, Homo sapiens had long forgotten, right, that they had already spread all over the world 10,000 generations earlier. From yeah, around 1492 latest. Of course, there were earlier expansions, but latest then the world was rediscovered from Europe. Right? Slaves came just in time, and for Europe's economic boom, which some still see as proof of our superiority in Europe, it's based on little more than merciless exploitation, both of foreign raw materials and of foreign people as the cheapest labor. And the so-called discovery of the world also led to its description, right? The first scientific journal appeared in 1665 in France, and soon after, a work on the classification of people in the newly discovered, better rediscovered parts of the world in 1684. Now, here, the term human races, you see it, for the first time, is used for the first time, but only in the sense of geographical variance, right? This term is here, you see it. And the main problem here was explaining the origin of these different variants now, which cannot actually exist if humanity descended from Adam and Eve, right? How is that possible? So meaning there was a challenge here, but this challenge had already been elegantly solved in this book from 1655, because there it was explained that Adam was not the first man at all, right? But only the first Jew, right? So meaning there were not one, but several forefathers. And therefore, the book describes people before Adam, the pre-Adamites, Adam's parents, so to speak. Now, a lot of conflict emerged among the intellectual scholars about the origin and classification of humankind. Now, finally, a natural scientist came onto the scene, Carl von Linné. He invented, as we know, the scientific systematics and binomial nomenclature using genera and species. And a formal system, or this formal system up to today, is used to classify the natural world, and it's still valid until today, and we all use it, right? Now, in this first edition of Linné from 1735, he described 4 geographical variants of humans. Europeans, white, Americans, red, I think it's here, yes, Europeans, okay. Europeans, white, okay, this is all in Latin, but I translated to you. Europeans, white, Americans, red, Asians, dark, and Africans, black, okay? Now, that was just sort of a geographical explanation and just using skin color. But now what happened 24 years later in 1758, that's the 10th edition, Linné changed the description for human dramatically, and I would say very dramatically, because now he added descriptions of specific personality traits invariably fixed to different skin colors. Let's look at that. So, you see here there is Americanus. Of course, there is some other Homo he described. I leave them away. But the Americanus. Now you see there is this. Okay, I give you the English translation here. So Americanus, blushing to red, choleric, what also can be said, hair black, straight, thick, nose flared, face freckled with long chin, almost beardless, persistent, cheerful, free, smeared with labyrinth lines, and governed by customs, okay, by habit. All right, so that's, you know, that these are personality traits invariably fixed to skin colors by Linné. Now, let's look at, okay, Europeans, okay. Of course, Europeans from pale to white, sanguine, muscular, hair blonde, curly, eyes sky blue, easy, agile, perceptive, inventive, of course, and governed by law, right? I mean, Linné writes this. And now Asian Asiaticus, from dark to pale, yellow, melancholic, stiff, hair blackish, eyes dark, cruel, splendid, loving, whatever that means, cover garments and governed by views, opinions, right? And now Africans, there is some others, monstrous and troglodytes included, but I just go to this upper one, Africans, Sans, Alpha. So here it says black, phlegmatic, flabby, hair, cold, black skin, silky, smooth, nose, flat, lips, swollen, elongated breasts, long labia, sluggish, indifferent, anointed with fat, and ruled by arbitrariness, okay? So, as I said, Linné based phenotypical external characteristics on unchangeable personality traits or characteristic behavior. This is the first time, this was the first time that racism was justified by natural science and by invariable races. Despite the fact that they are completely faulty, right? These ideas continue to shape how many people think about race until today, and as a biological fact rather than a social construct, you know. And that's when anthropology became important, because now many generations of anthropologists spent measuring and comparing humans with the aim of scientifically proving the existence of these human races. And because our field of anthropology was instrumental in constructing human races, we as anthropologists today must be instrumental in deconstructing them. And, you know, of course, finally, all described races of the world were categorized and compared. So in the upper left corner, you see the Caucasian race. And if you ever wondered how this term came about, it was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in Göttingen in Germany, who in the beginning of the 19th century fell in love with a female skull from Georgia in his collection. And then termed all white people after the prominence of that female skull, Caucasians. But you know, one detail here I find very funny. I think it is here. Look at this. Now you see that Einzelne Deutsche on the top. It says individual Germans are right at the top in the comparison of height. Yeah. If you see it here, but of course this is a way of how you can forge any statistics, right? And so towards the end of the 19th century, then everywhere in Europe, anatomical museums were established, which also explained the scientific differences between the races to the public. And the aim was always to create a public understanding that Europeans are superior, right? While all other races were inferior. And this, of course, helped Europeans to sleep well at night, despite genocides, slavery, colonialization, exploitation, and plundering in other continents. And since most Europeans were not able to travel to the colonies, humans were brought to Europe and exhibited in zoos. And just a few examples here. Of humans in zoos. And so now this supposed primitiveness of Africans was, of course, also demonstrated in museums. Here, Satya Bartman, she was actually brought from South Africa to Europe, and during her lifetime was measured many times by anthropologists. After her early death, she died with 26 years old. She was stuffed and exhibited in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris until 1976. And finally in 2002, and that was a project, one of the main projects around this time of repatriation by Philip Tobias. Her remains were brought back to South Africa and buried in her hometown in the Eastern Cape. And speaking about museums, we should not forget that large parts of their collections in European museums were acquired during colonial times, right? Often military incursions and punitive expeditions by various European countries were utilized for enlarging museum collections, right? And if you see museum collections, I mean, at the end of the 19th century, museum collections in Europe grew by more than 1,000% in just a few decades at the end of the 19th century. And of course, if you see new and ostentatious museum buildings all over Europe, serve to demonstrate the supposed European superiority, right? Here you see Senckenberg. Came a bit later than London, but still, it was during that phase. And then, of course, you know, at the same time, the collections were utilized to show that Europeans were the most supreme people on earth, meaning this supremacy was not only demonstrated, but it was scientifically proven, right? Okay, so it was especially, again, the field of anthropology, which made itself the forerunner of racial research. And as a result, until today, thousands of remains of humans from all over the world can be found in European museums. Yeah? In Senckenberg, we have about 400 human remains, which we are trying to repatriate if we can find the provenance. Now, all of this was, of course, easily accepted by Europeans because first, Europe became extremely wealthy through exploitation of other continents. And second, most of these highly respected European scientists and thinkers approved racism. I would call it brainwashing on the highest level, right? And even worse, because our sciences today are actually based on these ideas, we have real difficulties to deconstruct racism at all. Yeah? This cool book from 1848 says it all in one sentence. Europe is the smallest, you can read it, but the most educated continent. The Europeans surpass all other people of the earth in arts and sciences as well as in power. So I could actually also cite practically every European philosopher from that time. Let's just take one from Germany here, Immanuel Kant. That's what he has to say. The Negroes of Africa have by nature no feeling that rises above the ridiculous. Now, you see, if you try and call Kant a racist, I mean, people say, no, he was not a racist, you know, of course, but I mean, what else can you say about a sentence like that? So I think we have to just revisit this history. And you know, if you, of course, you know, Kant also, of course, he assumed one common ancestry for all humans, but he actually constructed some sort of regional development which made Europeans superior, right? And he described this superiority in drastic words, as I showed you. But Kant, what Kant didn't know is how to explain this special progressive developments in Europeans. That was his problem. I mean, he said, okay, Europeans are special, but now the process behind it. And Charles Darwin now solved this problem 100 years later. But Kant, of course, he was long dead by then. Unfortunately, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution from 1856 became one of the most important works underpinning racism. I mean, it was not meant like this at all. But the two most important mechanisms in evolution are mutation and selection. And so the stronger one survives and reproduces. And of course, as I said, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was not meant to support racism at all, but it developed into the most important work underpinning it. And because you see, favored races for life, that's the important point. Who these favored races for life were that Darwin described was very clear for Europeans themselves, right? And I even think Darwin was forgiven his views on humans being related to apes, which many people didn't like, because he offered Europeans more reason for sleeping well at night, despite aggression and exploitation and destruction of other continents. Now, about the same time as Darwin's thesis on evolution, this work appeared, which decisively worked out the inequality of human races. Mainly these ideas were based on the Christian beliefs that dark skin was given by God to sinners, right? And Gobineau, the author, moreover emphasizes the harmfulness of racial mixing. He says the cultural development of successful peoples was thereby endangered. And exactly this was also the decisive argument for imperialists oppression and exploitation, as well as different forms of apartheid until today. And so almost completely forgotten is that alternative models existed much earlier. Because, for example, all of these Muslim scholars already between 800 and 1400 have put forward evolutionary ideas which did not involve racial differences, believing that all people share a common humanity. Specifically, the transmutation, as it was called, from apes to humans was discussed, what is in complete contrast with the view held by most Muslims and Christians today, creationists today, that humans did not undergo evolution, specifically from apes. What is important, however, I think Ibn Khaldun, for example, on the right, explicitly rejected Talmudic and Christian beliefs of dark African skins being a curse inflicted upon sinful human beings. And already at the beginning of the 9th century, Al-Jahiz on the left attributed dark skin colors to hot climates, right? And more than a millennium later, we finally know the biology behind skin colors. It is indeed related to the effects of ultraviolet radiation. High UVB radiation has two effects. It supports forming vitamin D3, and at the same time, it destroys folic acid, that is vitamin B9. And of course, if UVB radiation is low, the folic acid is protected, but not enough vitamin D3 is being produced. And both extremes, UVB too high and UVB too low, are very unhealthy. And that's why humans, when expanding all over the globe, needed to create an UVB equilibrium. And a rather easy evolutionary solution was the adaptation of skin pigmentation. I mean, the optimal skin pigmentation in certain areas which are influenced by altitude and latitude correspond precisely to the intensity of UVB radiation. And of course, there are many other reasons why we know today that biological races do not exist, right? Since 20 years already, it has been known that the variation of genetic traits within a population can be greater than between populations of different continents. So the same genes are presented in all people worldwide, only in different variations. And so what that means is that among the 3.2 billion base pairs in the human genome, there is not a single fixed difference that separates, for example, Africans from non-Africans. I mean, I'm using this Africa example now, but it's true for all continents. So I think from a paleoanthropological perspective, as well as from a biological perspective, we have every reason to deconstruct races and racism. One last example here. Just look at the continent that invented races and scientific racism. I mean, everything that makes up Europe is immigrated, right? Agriculture and animal husbandry were not invented in Europe. People immigrated, for example, from Anatolia. So the settlement density increased. The consequences were displacement on the one hand and mixing on the other, right? And more, we understand that it was like that always and everywhere in human history. So meaning our existence of Homo sapiens today, we owe to the worldwide expansions of large-scale mixtures of modern human populations and transfer of knowledge and cultural adaptations from everywhere to everywhere, right? And what is today? Now look at today. Today, we experience global migration barriers due to the segregation of wealthy areas, prosperous areas. In the long run, of course, this will not be successful, of course, because worldwide gene flow and cultural exchanges is required for humanity to survive and develop, as our history has shown all the time. Yeah. And one last remark here, it's not only the wealthy areas you recognize from space at night. These lights also represent the concentration of cultural and natural heritage from all over the world in museums, right? I mean, Homo sapiens in prosperous regions have learned in 2 generations to defend the wealth accumulated during colonial times, despite the abolition of colonialism. It's about time we change this. One important point to start, yeah, is to understand that racism was invented and constructed, yeah, meaning it can and it will be deconstructed. And especially as anthropologists, we must actively take part in teaching our fellow humans. We are different, but we are all equal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Friedemann. Thank you for this really fascinating and eye-opening talk on the history of race, of racism, and racism with Line already entering science and then taking over eventually, and for showing us now the importance and the urgency of deconstructing race and deconstructing racism. But it's deep rooted in our minds. It has, of course, this very long history, as you just showed us, and it goes probably even before the times of Göbekli Tepe. So how can we succeed in deconstructing racism, deconstructing it in science, of course, and in society?
I think we have to be more open and use our, as I said, use the results of our own field, right? Anthropology, biology, paleoanthropology. I mean, we have all the tools we need to deconstruct racism. I mean, it's just that people are slow, and it takes generations, to change minds. I mean, it is clear that once you have your knowledge, or once you have your experience from when you were a child, it will not change very much, right? So that's why tackling young people is very important for me, because I think I mean, I'm giving lots of talks also in schools, right? Now people say, schools, why do you go to schools? I know why I go to schools, because this is where I can have the most influence, actually, so we should all at least, once a year, give us a talk in school, in a school. That's a very easy, practical thing to do, right? But of course, that's only one point, right? I mean, of course, exhibitions, museum exhibition, and I think, distributing knowledge is always important, but for me, as I say, the most important is to reach young people.
Yeah, I agree, and the younger probably the more effective they are, so that children at a really early age get to know.
I mean, we are on a good track. I think things will change maybe in 2, 3, 4 generations. But it takes work, it doesn't go by itself, and it takes generations. We don't like that because we want changes fast, but I think changes are never fast. It always takes a few generations, but we have to think we are anthropologists or paleoanthropologists. We can think in generations. We know what it means, right? I mean, our politicians don't, right? They think for 5 years or something like that. But I think we have to think in many generations. Yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant lecture, Friedemann. Thank you very much. I am so happy that we are able to have you here and have a Philippine audience, and of course our friends from other parts of the world for your lecture, which I first heard on the Dimanisi Paleoanthropology Field School online, and now we're having it here for us. Thank you so much. What you said, 2, 3, 4 generations to institute change, and it a lot of it is on it. From what you said, it's the responsibility of anthropologists to make sure that this change happens, because our perspective is actually on a longer term, bigger context. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. Compared to, say, politicians, who in our case, in the Philippine context, is what, 3 years, 6 years at most. So that's very enlightening. And what you also said about reaching young people being the most important factor. Our technology now allows us to do this, right? Do you think there's going to be a drastic change, like something that will make change faster now that we have the technology to reach more people and faster, like what we are doing now? We are on Zoom, we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube. How influential do you think will technology be to this change in the next couple of, well, in our generation, at least, hopefully?
No, I think it will play a big part, but we have to be clear that all the other views and a lot of fake news and racist views are also using the same technology. So, it's like we have to use these communication means and social media just to reach people, and also not to give the floor to to views which we don't, which we cannot support. You know, the problem is here, and I can see it in social media that that you can very easily distribute fake news. We see it, you know, all over the world. Where I see it very clearly happening is in Africa, because practically they are now social media is the main instrument of you know, of getting information. It's more important than radio, newspaper, or TV. So if you have people engaging in social media, they can take over, right? Whatever they want. You know, every worldview can take over, and I think so. I think it's a chance, but it also there is also a danger here.
Like a
I mean,
double-edged sword.
yeah, sure. That's why to use only social media is not enough. We have to get into personal contact with people, and that's why I'm also going into schools, giving lectures there. Like I'm a real person talking to these students, you know, and they can ask questions. And I think that's, of course, I'm not reaching millions of people at the same time, but you know, the people I'm reaching are, how do you say, are drawn into this story. And for example, we started, you know, the places where we worked, we started prehistory clubs in schools, right? Or we started, but we offered to support prehistory clubs in schools. I think that's what I want to say. And I think, you know, you can do that everywhere. I mean, we all work somewhere in the field, and we have field stations or field sites. And I think it would be good if all of us would around the world would not only do the scientific work there, but also somehow facilitate some, you know, some school clubs around the site. You know, I think this would also help a lot. You know, in order to link our research to the experience in the field. And there, I mean, I think these are concepts we have to develop as scientists, you know, together, you know, including the sort of the local people around our sites into our research and so on, you know. But I think, Mylene, you have a lot of experience with it. I think you are in a much better position to say something about that than me, right? I mean,
Well, as my advisor, you know very well, it's still a developing story.
yeah.
So yeah, I agree with Friedemann, and to have a biologist, an established scientist like yourself, speak about the need to reach out to schools and to be able to link research to the reality of school children. That's a very strong message, especially to archaeologists and anthropologists who might be listening and watching with us this afternoon. And also those cultural workers who are in museums, because sometimes we have this image of ourselves or of those people who are quote unquote experts or specialists, that they are on a pedestal and they don't make the effort to make the research relevant to the public. But I guess that would be, as your talk has shown, that would be the relevance of why we are doing what we are doing, is to help develop this understanding of humanity. And yeah, so that's why it's very important that we had someone like you, Friedemann, with us this afternoon. Are there any questions in the chat box?
Yes, we have a few questions in the chat box, but we will have to filter them first. So maybe we can have a few more questions from the other audiences.
So while Ado, there's a question from Dr. Rosales. Friedemann, Dr. Mary Rosales is one of our most senior and most respected anthropologists here in the Philippines. Yes, Doc Mary.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Friedemann. And this was an amazing, eye-opener for me. And I have been doing anthropology, although not much on paleo anthro. But I wanted to reflect in the last week, I've been involved with the University of the Philippines, which has been studying 100 years of anthropology since the department was founded, essentially in 2017. And so this is now the 105th year or something. And of course, the whole evolution of anthropology in the Philippines has been much discussed. And I was reflecting on pretty much discounted was all the measuring that American anthropologists in 1900 to about maybe 1915 or later did. That's kind of course, rejected now because worldwide it doesn't have much stature. But what I find we're still struggling with in the whole anthropology domain, including the society itself, we have the Anthropological Association of the Philippines, is the issue of how you deal with what we call indigenous peoples. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a whole variety, but the one in particular I think many of us are concerned about would be the Aita, who are Aita are the much darker populations, more Melanesian, that extension through Southeast Asia and maybe Oceania as well. That population is all right. Now we call it, as anthropologists, ethnic groups, and that sounds good. But in reality, what's happening to them, I think, is actually racist. But we never want to use the term racist, I think, in anthropology, because that's been discarded. And yet the reality is, I think what's happening to how they're being discriminated against, red tagged, as we say, is that they're communists and, up in the hills, is essentially racist. And maybe, so I guess my question is, and maybe my other anthropology friends here could verify, are we trying to get away from the term racist and make it, smooth it over by saying ethnicity as a good word, when in reality it's racist and we don't want to face that particular issue? So how do you connect the two or disconnect the two?
Okay, that is a very good comment. We are discussing this as well. So what we are discarding is the term race, but what we have not discarded is the term racist. It sounds a bit strange, maybe, but sort of biological race, we do not find any evidence for it. But racistic behavior, it still exists, and we call it racistic behavior, right? So I think we differentiate here between the term race and something which, of course, stems from that word, but has a different meaning now. Now, I think racist behavior. We will have, okay, as I told you, there's a big discussion in Europe, in many of the constitutions of many countries, what to do. And Germany, for example, will drop the word race in the constitution. It will not be there anymore, but it will say that the constitution says that that we are against racistic behavior. So meaning that word racistic you can still use. Everybody knows what it means, but it refers to something which used to be race, but the race doesn't exist anymore. So I think racistic you can use. Now about ethnic groups, ethnicity, I think I would not use that term either. These are just different societies. I think, we went through a whole lot of changes in nomenclature here. We called it, you know, tribes or ethnic groups, then cultures. And I think now at the moment we are on the using the word society sort of as a word describing societal groups. But I think if something is racist, you just call it racist. And if a person is a racist, you just call him or her a racist. Finished, you know. I think everybody understands. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mary. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. Friedemann, if I may ask, you mentioned in the earlier part of your lecture about repatriating human remains that came into museums in Europe during colonial times. So of course it's as necessary as it is, but it's also difficult and for several reasons. How does Senckenberg Museum, for example, approach this?
Okay, I mean, I was always of the opinion that we must repatriate human remains if there are, you know, relatives still waiting for their ancestors to return, right? I mean, and of course we repatriated human remains to New Zealand and to Australia, but that's countries where there are national programs for supporting this, right? Because you have to do a lot of provenance research. I mean, it costs money, right? The question is who pays for it, right? And now these countries, New Zealand and Australia, they actually pay for this provenance research. Now we have other countries like Namibia, where we also have human remains, and you know, Namibia is not going to pay for it. Namibia is going to say, okay, we want our ancestors back, and I say yes, you get them, and we have to find the money to do that. Now in Germany, there was a dramatic change during the last government in approaching this, because first of all, now we have an agency where we can apply for funds to do provenance research, and secondly, we have a new law that we not only can or should, we must repatriate human remains if not only if the other countries want it, we must make sure that we repatriate it. It's a completely different situation than 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was said, okay, if a country comes and wants something, then we might do something or not. But now we have to make sure that we get active. And I'm very happy about this new law. And of course, I was also pushing for it. But I think, you know, many museums in Europe, as I showed you, you know that museums collections were growing because I mean, things were stolen from all over the world, or okay, not always stolen, but taken from all over the world. But you see, there is a big discussion how to treat human remains, how to treat cultural remains, how to treat everything else. And the only position we have here, a common position in Germany now, is that human remains must be repatriated. All the other remains in museums which were dehumanized, or I mean, yeah, okay, human remains or deculturalized. There's not a clear position on that. You know, even the German Museum Council, they don't agree on repatriating all human remains. They say, okay, only if we can show that there is a you know, sort of a criminal context. But I mean, the question is, I think the whole colonialism is a criminal context. So for me, I don't have to differentiate between a colonial sort of officer stealing something or just sort of exchanging something, you know, or buying something, you know. But there's a big discussion on it. But I think I don't want to go into the cultural thing. That's more complicated. But the human remains. I think what we are trying to do is we are trying to set up a program so that we can just identify and the provenance of these human remains. Now in Senckenberg, we have about 350 skulls, of which about 150 are actually European, from Europe. And you know that some of them also in some collections are much older than 3-4 generations. And so I think we have about 150 human remains to deal with it from all over the world. There is a lot also from Asia, from Southeast Asia, from South America, from all over the world, and we are trying to yes, to find the relatives, and you know, and I think it's a long process, but and it costs a lot of money. But I think we are determined to do it.
Friedemann, your emphasis, your emphasis. Sorry, Alfred. Your emphasis on there is no biological basis for race is something that really needs to be communicated, especially to younger children who are just learning about humanity and how to deal with one another and how to accept with one another. And there have been studies that show that up to a certain age, actually kids cannot differentiate and do not differentiate between skin color. You know, this is racism and the idea of being racist. This is not an easy topic, and it's actually could be uncomfortable for many people. But you have decided, you as a biologist have decided to tackle it. What compelled you to do this?
Because it was very easy. I'm spending a lot of time in Africa, and I most of the time live there. Actually, I'm only in Frankfurt for 10 days now, and you know, I mean, I see what's going on, right? I see that, you know, we have the same things today going on. You know, we have, I mean, for example, up to today, it is the Western countries like Europe defining what is good for an African country. I mean, you know, I mean, like every year there is donor talks, right? So there's donors in Europe, and then they say, okay, what do you want? What do you need? But we want that, and so on. And so the definition of what countries need is still the same as 100 years ago. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, if you see if you see that it is practically impossible for African people to just be tourists in Europe, I mean, it's impossible, right? I mean, they just don't get visa. You know, we have this situation very often. Even students, they don't get visa. You know, I mean, we have. I mean, I see all these situations. I am in these situations, and I'm sort of with people on the other side, and then they ask me, "Why do you do that?" I say, I mean, I mean, I can see what's going on, right? And that's why, you know, for example, I'm also involved in a, you know, there is a dinosaur in Berlin, right? The dinosaur is from Tanzania, right? So now the question is, how can, you know, the dinosaur was taken to Germany more than 100 years ago. Of course, the Berlin Museum says it's ours, right? Tanzania says yes, but it comes from here. What can we do? And so now the Germans say, you know, you can just come and see it here. But I mean, nobody can come and see it in Berlin. How? I mean, how can they? I mean, you know, and the interesting thing is there's even people, there's many people in African countries, and Africa is not one country, it's 54 countries. I mean, there's many people in these countries who have money to travel, but they cannot. They're not allowed. They don't get a visa, you know. I mean, you know, I see all these things and I'm asking myself, what is that? And then I discovered that this is, yeah, this is the result of something what was going on 100, 200, 300 years ago, but it does not have really changed, right? And this is my motivation. And, you know, even institutions, now think of it. I mean, there's museums in Africa, right? I mean, but these museums in Africa, and, you know, they're in Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, I mean, there's famous museums there, you know, since more than 100 years. But the thing is, when these museums were founded, like in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, you know, it was a tool to these museums were tools to actually to educate people in these countries according to European understanding of history, right? And so the thing is, I am very much involved in supporting these museums to change their, you know, what you know, to find a new way of perceiving themselves. You see, because when they were founded, they were just purely sort of used by colonial people to yes, to sell the same view as in Europe or to sell the European view. But now this has to change, and it is actually changing. That's why museums are actually changing, you know, very much. You know, I mean, okay, I don't know the situation there in your part of the world, but in Africa, it's changing very much. You know, these museums have a very different functions there. Of course, there is some collections and some research going on and so on, but it is much more now a place where the society is discussing, you know, is discussing their own sort of issues. So museums more and more in Africa turned into spaces for negotiating culture. And that is something completely different because from the European sort of explaining the world. And okay, so these are the things I'm involved in, right? And together with that, I was, and then I thought, okay, where is the basis for all of it? And this is how I then finally arrived. I was very shocked when I read the. I have to be honest. Before I started to go into details of that, I didn't know that Linné, 1758, wrote all these things. You know, it was pretty pretty shocking to read this, you know, but at the end it all is very clear how it developed and so on, and of course I'm from Europe myself. That's why maybe I'm more interested in this history, but I think most of my life is in Africa, so that's why there is some motivation here.
So interesting. Thank you. Well, speaking of uncomfortable questions, there is a question that Ado is sending me and he is uncomfortable about it, but I think you've answered this during your lecture anyway. Someone is asking, my question is why religious systems of oppression, mainly in Europe, were eventually outmoded to a degree by racial system of oppression. And there's another question. Certain claims with statistical data are purported to support what white people are smarter than people of color. Do you believe in this do you believe this is an acceptable fact? I think you answered this already with your slide earlier about using the false usage of statistics, right?
Yeah, but I mean, of course, it's not true. I mean, there's no. As I said, you can prove anything you want. I mean, we know that. I mean, as scientists, we know that you can prove anything, right? I mean, you just. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, you just present your facts in a certain way and you do statistics in a certain way. I mean, I think it is the worldview we have, how we explain things. I mean, we shouldn't forget that science is not objective, right? I mean, it depends on, you know, it depends on the worldview, right? And even in our anthropology, I mean, you know, if you, I mean, I'm thinking of many discussions, you know, for example, Raymond Dart, right? I mean, I met him in Johannesburg many years ago, and you know, he was convinced that Australopithecines used tools. You know, he even you know, he even described a culture. You know, aggression. You know, the osteodontoceretic culture of pre-humans. Maybe you know that culture. You know, full of blood and aggression, and you know, and he said, you know, the humans are only as they are today because they were aggressive, right? And it was proven by a lot of bones coming from a cave in South Africa called Makapanskat, and you know, books were written about it. You know, popularized by Robert Ardrey. You know, the killer ape man and so on. So I'm just giving you this example. Now the thing is, today we know that these bones in the caves, they were not tools. I mean, they were brought in by hyenas and porcupines and stuff like that, and has nothing to do with an aggression culture. But what I'm saying is, when did that happen? That was in the 1960s, right? In the 1960s, during the Cold War in Europe, it was, people wanted to hear exactly that. You know, that was a very appropriate message. You know, aggression in humans. It was fitting into their time. Now, if you look in the 1970s in anthropology, you know what happened. There was a lot of research, even funded research, and you get a lot of funding for research which asks for the role of women in evolution, right? In the 1970s, 1980s. And today, you know how we get money today. If we need money for research, all we have to do is we have to write the word climate, you know, into our proposal in order to get money. So you see already that research and even the funding of research is not independent of what is going on around us in the world, yeah. And so coming back to that question of white people being more intelligent, yes, this was a worldview, and it was needed, yeah, in order to oppress everybody else, and that's why it was brought up, right? And it's just stupid that some of these things, once they are there, then they never go away, right? And that's why we have to make sure that the things that certain distorted views are not repeated all the time, or we have to bring other views, or you know, yes. Sorry, that was a long explanation, but I think I just wanted to show that our science is not objective anyway.
What an eye opener. Are there any other questions?
Yes, we have one from a young person, one of the people Dr. Schrenk would want to converse with, I suppose. He's asking if there are books or resources you can recommend to those who are not well versed in anthropology or biology, but really want to get into the topic.
I think there's many books. Yeah? I think what we should do is we should put a list. I think Mylene knows books, and Alfred, and everybody knows these books. I think should we put a list together and and then you send it
That's a
around,
good idea.
Mylene?
That's a
Yeah,
good idea. Yeah, we can do
because
that.
I think it is a good it's a good suggestion uh, to put a list together. Okay, so I will send you, Mylene, a few of these what I think are good books for this topic, and you can maybe
Thank you, and
put it on the
we will
website.
find a way. We will find a way to get that to you. Also, in the past, we've had lectures about human evolution that kind of discusses the topic not on an expert level, but on a level that is understandable to most
Yeah.
people like ourselves. And we shall continue to do that in this format, as well as when we go back to school after this pandemic, which is hopefully soon. Um, thank you. So are there other questions? Maybe one more question for Dr. Schrenk before we go? Okay.
Did we have another question?
Oh, we have just a fresh question.
Mhm.
Let's see. This is from June Miguel. He asked if there is no biological basis for race, is it still appropriate to classify people based on phenotypic physical appearances and origins? For example, being Asian because of having typical physical characteristics of being Asian.
Yeah, I mean, this is always the question: how do you classify people if you need to classify them? But I think there is what we definitely have. I mean, of course, we don't have races, but what we have is, of course, we have geographical variance, right? I mean, geographical variance can be, of course, can be described, with certain features. I mean, there's no problem, but the race discussion is a different one. You see, there is like a connotation to it, to behavior and to intelligence and to all of that. And so in fact, we are using the term geographical variance, okay, in biology, also related to humans. And there's no problem with it, it's not invariable race. The whole thing is that geographical variants are variants and are variable, right? And the main point is that there is no invariable traits in any of these geographical variants. I think that's the main point, right?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Schrenk.
Thank you. So as we draw to a close, if I may ask one last question. Friedemann, looking at where we're at right now and what's happening in the Ukraine, and you are a paleoanthropologist who's been studying human evolution, will there ever be a point in time where humans will not resort to aggression or oppression of others to push forward one's well-being or agenda?
I didn't quite get the question, Mylene. Your
Do
question
you
is what?
foresee, yeah, you've been
Do I foresee a time when
yeah.
there's no more aggression?
Yes.
No, I think we have to, no. I think we are somehow, we have aggression in us, and we are only Homo sapiens because we exploited. It's not that sort of aggression. You see, we have two things. We have this wonderful way of cooperation within a smaller group. But we cannot, as humans, we have three big challenges. One is we cannot grasp time, right? Time is something we cannot deal with it. We don't have a receptor for time. I mean, like if continents are moving and if you stand there, you don't see anything, right? You just say there's nothing happening. Of course it's happening, but we don't have we cannot think in many generations, right? That's one point. Then we cannot think in big numbers. That's also what we cannot think. I mean, we all produce waste, right? Then we think, we put our small waste bag somewhere, and then we are unable to, even in a town like Frankfurt, I mean, there's 600,000 or 700,000 people. If you think that everybody produces waste and how much waste that is, you read it somewhere, but you have no clear picture of it. Then number three, what we also we cannot think in terms of, large areas, right? I mean, we don't know what's going on in other areas. So what I mean is we are confined to small groups, right? Now, within these small groups, we have bonds and we are bonding, and we have very strong cooperation, as I was showing before, and showing sharing and caring and all that stuff, but at the same time, we are concentrating on these small groups because there's nothing else we can do in our biology. We form aggressions to other groups, and it will not change. And I think if you look at how Homo sapiens has come to the point where we are now all over the world. As soon as Homo sapiens comes onto a certain, let's say a certain island, I mean, take the Mediterranean. There were some small, there was some hippos living in some elephants. They were very small, only about 80 centimeters high, so 1 meter. The dwarfed hippos and the dwarfed elephants. As soon as humans came, less than one generation, or within the same generations human arrived there, everything was dead, everything was killed, everything was gone. Now look at mammoths or something like that. Look at Neanderthals. Look at every human all over the shore, where all the animals are dead or gone or extinct. I mean, look at what's going on over the last generation in Africa alone. You know what I mean? I mean, 2 generations ago, Africa was full of animals, and there were a few sort of zoos where people were living, and now it's the other way around. And in 2 generations, I think, look at what we do to biodiversity. I mean, we are killing everything. I mean, look at climate, what we do. I mean, we are completely unable to control this problem. I mean, of course, I know there's many people, they say we have to do something, but you will see it will never happen, because humans only were that successful because they were taking over everything else. So I'm very, very, very skeptical that this can be controlled. I'm sorry, Mylene. I think. And it also applies to these conflicts, and to, there will always be some dictators somewhere, and for some reason they will be powerful, and for some very funny reason they've even become more powerful now than before. And I think we are coming. There's an interesting book called The End of the Illusion, and we have this illusion. I think our generation was living in the illusion that everything gets better all the time. No, it doesn't. I think my answer is no.
Thank you. That is something to reflect on. So again, we would like to turn the floor to Dr. Rosales before we close, and after that, Alfred.
Yeah, sorry, but I can't help thinking of the Ukraine situation today, where, just from my experience, a number of humanitarian groups in Asia, of which I'm a member, were being mobilized, of course, to provide assistance and so on. And all of us are very concerned and about the refugees, for example. But many of the members of these groups are saying, who are Asian, saying, and African, are saying, yes, but wait a minute. Where were the Europeans when it came to the Syrian refugees, the Yemeni, the Myanmar, the Cameroonians, all of those refugees walking to Europe and so on and being rejected. So is that, you know, and they're saying that's racist.
Yeah, of
There's a-
course it's racist. It's, no, of course, I completely agree. I mean, you know, I mean, this is even, you know, if you think of now, I mean, there were many wars even started by, you know, by America, by the NATO, you know, think of Libya, think of, you know, Iraq. Yeah, I think of all of this. Of course, this is racist. I mean, you know, I agree. What else can you say? This is, yeah, that's just how it is. But I think this is the inability of people, what I said before, to think in long terms, in long time. You know, people just forget things, and you know, it's long time, large groups, and big numbers. That's something we cannot do as humans, and that's why this is our. I mean, we could deal with it through our intellect, but we don't do it, right? And I think that's our major challenge here as humans, you know. And of course, then, yeah, we have exactly these effects. Yeah, I know. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Friedemann. Thank you for your straightforward answers and even more straightforward lecture. Thank you so much. This is why we love Friedemann, and this is why Don Johansson said that he is his favorite person.
Did he
So,
really say that? Okay, that's I was
he
not in
did.
the talk. Okay, all right. Anyway, good.
So, Alfred, I turn it
Yeah,
over.
I agree. And of course, thank you again, Friedemann. Thank you for your wonderful lecture and for your very wise words for this great discussion we had. And this is not the end of this webinar. Also, we are taking a break. But in continuation, what Friedemann in his just a few minutes ago in his talk said about what happens on small islands and interactions and the arrival of humans or hominins and the impact on insular faunas. That's actually the talk that we will have on April 21, when our colleague Gert Vandenberg from the University of Wollongong, who is also a team member in the Kalinga excavation project, will talk exactly about that. He will give a talk with the island, with the title Islands of the Small Giants, Pleistocene Hominin Arrival and its Impact on Insular Megafaunas. So please join us all. Come again. We have a little break. So the School of Social Sciences has several events now in April, including the SOS week in first week of April. And then, of course, there's the Easter break. And then we have the SOS research conference from April 18 to April 20, to which you are all very much invited. And then April 21st, Gert Vandenberg with the final lecture for this semester and our webinar series. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Friedemann, again. Thank you so much.